One of the most popular additions in the Minecraft Tricky Trials update was the brand new Mace item. It provided for a really unique way to engage in combat with its special falling base mechanic. Upon its initial reveal, a lot of people were claiming it to be the best weapon Minecraft had to offer, and that got me thinking, how true is that statement? There are quite a few items that could be used as weapons, and with so many, some are bound to be worse than others, so today I thought it'd be fun to rank every weapon in Minecraft from the worst to the best. At least I thought it would be fun. So basically, everything about planning this video went wrong. First, I wasn't even sure if this was going to be the next video since I had two Minecraft ideas, this and hot takes. So I took a community poll to see which one you all wanted to see, and... Are you kidding me? Anyway, I was thinking at first that this would be a short video with maybe like 9 things to rank. There'd be all the tools, bows, tridents, and maces. But then while I was playing Smash Bros, I started thinking, well, you can use a flint and steel and TNT as weapons, I guess. And then I started thinking more. Well, if TNT counts, why not beds? They deal damage. If damage is the qualifier, why not anvils? They deal damage. And I started overthinking myself to the point of there being 33 items to rank today, and one of them are campfires. So yeah, coming up with what counts for this list was extremely difficult because technically anything could be used as a weapon. I could beat you to death with court stairs if I really wanted to. But eventually, I settled on anything that has a way to damage something outside of a simple punch or suffocation. I also decided not to include mobs like wolves on the list since that feels a bit outside of being a weapon. Now, there may very well be something I missed because this game has a lot of items, but I guarantee it's something that'd be in last place anyway, so if you point it out in the comments, you're a massive nerd. Okay, but now that we got that all settled, this list will be judging the weapons based on how useful they are in a survival setting, not really PvP. On top of that, I'm considering how good they are as weapons. Obviously, stuff like the pickaxe is super useful outside of fighting, but that won't be a factor here. So with all that finally being said, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's jump into the list. Just like previous rankings, we've got ourselves a tier list. Beginning with our F tier, these are the blocks and items that are near useless in a combat setting. Heck, some would probably argue they don't even belong on a list like this. That's definitely the case for our first one, 33, the egg. This is the unique property of not dealing any damage. So why is it here? Well, when you throw it at a mob, it can deal knockback, so technically you could use it to push a mob into lava or something. But I'm sure this situation has basically never happened, so if you're going around throwing eggs at things for combats, I think you might just be a little insane. I guess you can sometimes get a baby chicken out of it. That's kinda cool. 32, the cactus. Massive improvement over the egg here because this guy can actually hurt you. However, don't get too excited, this has a lot of problems holding it back. For starters, it doesn't really deal that much damage. A mob has got to be standing in that cactus for a long time for it to actually die. The cactus also has very strict conditions for where it can be placed. It can only be put on top of sand, and it can't be placed next to any other block. So basically, any mob could just walk around the cactus. And if all that wasn't enough, if you somehow manage to kill something with this, it'll just destroy whatever the mob drops. For some reason, throwing items into cactuses completely deletes them. So yeah, there is no reason to ever use this. 31, Sweet Berry Bush. Pretty much just a slightly better cactus. It also damages at a super slow rate, but it can be placed on more blocks and next to other berry bushes. It also won't destroy mob drops, so theoretically, it's slightly more helpful. Unless you're trying to kill foxes, I guess. 30, Powdered Snow. This is some ups and downs compared to the last two. The main con is that powdered snow is a bit more annoying to obtain as it is a bit rare, but not by that much. It also won't damage things instantly, they have to be trapped within it for a little bit first. On the positive side though, there are basically no restrictions on where this can be placed. Mobs also easily get stuck inside of it, so you can freeze them when they least expect it. Honestly, not sure if this or sweet berries are better, but let's be real here, who cares? For our final F tier entry, we have 29, the Snowball. Now at first you may be confused why this isn't right next to the egg. It too does 0 damage and only knockback. At least the egg gives us a baby to look at afterwards. Well, the reason snowballs get to place up here is because there is actually one specific case where they can deal damage, that being against the blaze. It doesn't deal that much damage, but if you for some reason can't access a bow, then I guess you can use snowballs as a last resort. Keep in mind it takes quite a few snowballs per blaze, but I guess that this is at least a situation I can see someone using these in. I guess I should also mention that snowballs and eggs can be used to destroy end crystals during the dragon fight, but I wasn't really sure if that should be counted as combat or not. Alright guys, massive switch up here. This ranking actually has a D tier. We've been sort of ignoring it for the past few Minecraft rankings, but I think it will be helpful to have in this video. This tier is definitely more useful than our F tiers, but it's mostly stuff that's either heavily overshadowed by something else or only useful in a farm setting, which was kind of hard to rank. Starting with an overshadowed item, 28, the Fire Charge. This is basically just a worse flint and steel in almost every way. Both of them place down fire, but you can only use the Fire Charge once, whereas the flint and steel has 65 durability. The Fire Charge is also way more expensive to craft, requiring gunpowder, coal, and blaze powder compared to the simple iron ingot and flint. The only reason you could maybe want this is because if placed in a dispenser, it can get shot out like a projectile, but I can't really see that being too useful. Also, I want to mention that I'm not including the dispenser itself in the rankings since it's mostly used to shoot out other weapons. Hopefully that's fair enough. 27. Fireworks. Now I want to stress that this entry is not including its usage with crossbows. This is purely talking about when you place down the firework by itself. Obviously, since it's a firework, it flies up into the air, meaning it's kind of hard to use to hit something. However, if you set up a roof or a dispenser, then you can get the firework to hit something. It also does the most damage of anything we've seen so far, so under the right circumstances, this can be used. But if you're wanting to use fireworks as a weapon, you really should just get a crossbow. 26. The conduit. I'll be honest, I had a real hard time placing this. I haven't used one of these guys in years, so I kind of forgot they can even deal damage. They're able to kill any hostile underwater mob within 8 blocks, which I can't really see too much of a use for. Maybe if you have an underwater base, you could put it near an entrance to prevent drowns from getting in, but the range is so small that it's not really that practical. If you're getting a conduit, it's for the conduit power effect and not this attack property. Okay, the rest of the 3 items in this tier are just helpful weapons for certain farms. Obviously, if you find yourself in combat, they won't really be too useful, but if you count these being able to kill things in farms, then they deserve to at least be out of F tier. 25. The Wither Rose. This affects any mob that touches it with the Wither effect for a few seconds. Now essentially, this acts very similar to the Sweetberry Bush, however this has the advantage of not killing Wither Skeletons. That makes it extremely helpful for Wither Skeleton farms, as you can use them to spawn proof against everything else. Although it is kind of weird to say it's an advantage to not kill something. 24. The Magma Block. This will be able to damage most things that walk on top of it, but there are a few exceptions like Zombified Piglin, making these extremely helpful for gold farms. These are also way easier to get than the Wither Rose, as those require you to make the Wither kill something. I also like spamming it in Smash Bros. 23. Campfires. As you'd expect, standing on top of these will cause you to take damage. This is very helpful for certain mob farms like creeper farms to kill them and get their loot. Since the campfire is less than a block tall, you can use a hopper underneath it to pick up items, and the fire actually doesn't destroy items here. Also, fun fact, soul campfires actually deal damage faster than regular ones, so use those if you can. But now it's time for our C tier, the items I think can actually be used in a bit of a general combat setting. They're still far from what people would actually want to use, but I guess if they're all you have, you can work with them. Starting off, we got our tool trilogy here with 22 the hoe, 21 the pickaxe, and 20 the shovel. I'm just including all tool types in one entry here. I highly doubt people care exactly how the gold shovel compares to the iron hoe. Anyway, these 3 tools do actually do more damage than just punching with your fists, so if you have one of these and not a sword or an axe, then they're usable. Why you would have a hoe before either of those two, I have no idea. In terms of each tool's maximum DPS, or damage per second, a netherite hoe does 4 damage per second, a netherite pickaxe does 7.2 damage per second, and a netherite shovel does 10.4 damage per second. That actually did surprise me. I didn't realize the shovel did more damage than the pickaxe. Truth be told, I was going to put shovel on top of these 3 either way due to it being the cheapest, so that just made my job a lot easier. And I really need a break. 19 Wind Charge. This is one of 1.21's new additions, and it's kind of hard to place on its own. It's really helpful when used with the mace, as it allows the player to boost themselves upward and deal more damage, but by itself, it's not really that exciting. You throw it out in front of you and it flies in almost a perfectly straight line. Once it hits something, it'll cause a massive burst of wind to deal quite a bit of knockback. This is another pretty niche one, but if you have it in your inventory because of the mace anyway, it can be helpful to push things off a cliff or just out of the way. It's also worth noting that it does deal half a heart of damage too, so it can kill something unlike the egg. 18 the fishing rod. I was planning on not including this at first, but what the heck, I'm including cactuses, why not? This will be able to hook onto mobs and you can reel them towards you. Now this can't deal damage by itself, however, if you pillar up, you can use it to make a mob die of fall damage. Also, the amount of mob flies stacks with each reel, so if you have multiple people reel in at once, the target will go flying. Can't really say this is too practical, but it's undeniably extremely fun and I do it all the time. Also, I want to mention that while this isn't a PvP video, these are useful in a PvP setting due to it stunning people or something. I never really understood it. I'm sure people will very nicely tell me how I'm wrong in the comments. 17. Hey, where's the item? This is probably the single funniest weapon of the video. You could drop an anvil into something's head and depending on how far it fell, it can deal a lot of damage. In most cases, it'll be a one-hit kill, making this extremely powerful. Obviously though, it's got quite a few downsides. First off, it's expensive, causing 31 total iron ingots, though with a good iron farm, that's more than doable. The main issue is the fact that the anvils will quickly break after a few falls, and it requires so much setup that the mob will probably just move out of the way by the time you've dropped it. Honestly, the anvil probably deserves to place much lower on the list, but it's really funny. 16 the water bucket. I'm sure many of you are confused to even see this on the list, let alone place super high up. I mean, technically it can be used to drown things, but this is so much slower than just punching something to death. Well, luckily, water by itself can actually deal damage to certain mobs, most notably the Enderman. To be honest, this placement is a bit more defensive. If you get caught with an Enderman attacking you, you can place water down to give yourself a safe space to regen and kill them. Due to how deadly and common Endermen are, this is a technique I use quite a lot. It's hard to say the water bucket belongs that high up since it's only really good at dealing with one mob, but it does a pretty dang good job at that. combat. 15, Pointed Dripstone. For our final entry of this tier, we have another item that's partially based around dropping it on someone's noggin. Just like the anvil, based on however far it fell, it'll deal more damage to the target. Funnily enough, this actually deals more damage than the anvil if dropped from the same distance, making it automatically more deadly. It's also much easier to collect and keep since it won't disappear from existence like the anvil will. That makes this extremely fun to try and snipe a mob or player with, but that's actually not the reason it gets to place so high up. See, not only can you drop it onto things, but anything that falls into Pointed Dripstone will take extra damage. That makes them pretty helpful in mob farms, for example. Generally, you want to drop mobs a certain distance to leave them at half a heart so you can just punch them to death. So if you use Pointed Dripstone, you can actually save yourself a bit of blocks. It's not the most helpful thing in the world, but I'd certainly say it's worth considering. At the very least, this has to be placed above the anvil. But now it's time for our B tier, and you know what B stands for?
Bombs?
All 5 of our explosive items make up this tier, so let's just talk about them all at once. We've got TNT, TNT minecarts, beds, respawn anchors, and end crystals. So how do we determine which of these are the best and which are the worst? Well, for starters, let's just cover what they all share. Obviously, they each cause an explosion when activated, and that can deal a lot of damage to multiple things at once. Each explosion does a different amount of damage, though is a bit inconsistent on how much damage it did. In my testing with Blast Protection 4, the TNT minecart generally did the least amount of damage, and the end crystal did the most. Now that is pretty great damage because that's basically an insta-kill on any non-boss mob. However, these each have the pretty significant downsides of causing a lot of damage to the environment whenever they're used. Don't worry, villager, I'll save you from this zombie. Beds and respawn anchors also place down fire, which is important to keep in mind. Explosives are also extremely dangerous to actually use because they can also just as easily damage the person using it if they don't hide behind a wall. However, even with all that in mind, these are still good tools for taking out large hordes of enemies, players, and even bosses. But how are we going to determine which of these explosives are best? Yeah, we could just go by damage, but we also have to consider how the explosion is activated and what it takes to make the explosive. So now let's get to each of their individual rankings. 14, the TNT minecart. To make this, you obviously need both TNT and a minecart. Pretty simple math right there. In addition to that though, you also need a rail to place this on. Now there are a few ways to activate this thing. You can either drop it from a high height, have it roll over an activator rail, or you could place a billion of them in a circle track to create a nuke. Now this does have the advantage of exploding faster than actual TNT, but I think the more expensive crafting recipe and setup do probably make it the worst of these explosives. 13, the respawn anchor. To craft this you need 6 crying obsidian and 3 glowstone blocks, which is already quite expensive, but it gets even worse because you need 4 more glowstone blocks on top of that to activate it. Now once you get all the glowstone inside of it, it does activate instantly, which can make it easier to hit things with, but it also only works in the overworld and end. In the nether, it just lets you respawn. It being so costly to craft is definitely the main factor keeping it down. 12, the end crystal. I think this one is going to be kind of controversial since I know a lot of people actually use it for PvP. However, in a survival setting, this is really expensive. It costs 7 glass, a ghast tear, and an eye of ender per explosive. Now at the very least you do get your money's worth because it is by far the deadliest of these explosions. It does have the downside of requiring obsidian or bedrock to be placed down, but it's not too big of a hassle. Really, it's the price that's bringing this down for me. I doubt that there are many situations where using this in combat is the optimal choice. 11, TNT. This costs 4 sand and 5 gunpowder, which can be somewhat expensive but more than manageable. Now TNT is mostly something you'd want for mining, but since that's not a consideration here, I'm just going to ignore how useful it is for stuff like world eaters. To activate TNT, you need to give it a redstone signal or ignite it with a flint and steel, which is pretty simple. However, it takes several seconds after activation to actually explode. That does make it safer to use, but also harder to actually catch anything with. One thing that does let us do though is create TNT cannons, and I've got to admit, they're pretty fun. Wait, oh no, I messed up the timing! 10, beds. These are my favorite explosives for a few reasons. They're easily the cheapest, just requiring 3 wool and 3 planks. Now this does have the pretty major downside of not working in the overworld since clicking it here just makes you go but in the nether and end, they're extremely deadly. They're the go-to weapon for speedrunners fighting the dragon due to how much damage they deal. In fact, that's pretty much the main time I've seen any of these explosives be used in combat. Obviously, the explosives can be great outside of combat, but since this is only covering that aspect, I think the bed is the most useful. Okay, but now it's time for our A tiers, the stuff I think people would actually use somewhat regularly. They're not my personal preferred weapons, but I wouldn't blame anyone for using them. Starting off, we have 9 potions. I just decided to combine all the potions together into one spot. You can throw either splash variants or lingering variants at mobs. I mean, I guess you could trick someone into drinking a poison potion, but they'd have to be real stupid. One big plus for potions too is that they're able to ignore armor, so if you find a full netherite zombie, you'll be ready. Wait, why is nothing happening? Well, that's because we also have to consider the type of potion. There are 4 splash potions that can deal damage. First is obviously instant damage, which takes a solid chunk of hearts, and then there's poison, which takes health over a period of time. Now, most people probably think that damaging potions end there, however, instant health is actually able to deal damage to undead mobs. Now, a lot of people also think that regen can deal damage to undead mobs like poison can, but nope, that's just misinformation. The only other potion that can deal damage is just the splash potion of water, which does very little to both blazes and endermen. Of these potions, I definitely think instant damage is the best due to how quick it can kill things. However, the main thing holding potions back is how costly they are. Each potion requires a bottle and certain ingredients to brew. Then you also need gunpowder to make it into a splash variant. Potions also don't stack, which make them quite tedious to hold on to. So overall, while potions do have their strengths, I think they've also got quite a bit holding them back. 8. Flint and Steel. This is a pretty simple one as it'll just place down fire wherever it's used. As I'm sure you all can guess, most mobs don't like being on fire. Now it is worth noting that using a flint and steel as your only weapon is a bit ineffective. Mobs won't stay on fire for too long, and it's also not the fastest damage source in the world. However, it can be helpful to use alongside other weapons for extra damage. If a mob dies while it's on fire, it also has the extra benefit of cooking some of its drops. So for example, you can mercilessly burn a cow alive and you'll get a steak instead of raw beef, which is super helpful as it saves us from having to smelt. Now there are other ways to set mobs on fire, which does hold this back a bit more, but I still think the flint and steel is a more than worthwhile option. 7. The crossbow. Personally, I have always found this weapon kind of hard to use, but it's undeniably a fairly solid choice. This will let you shoot out not only arrows, but also fireworks to any mobs in front of you. Having a projectile weapon is very nice because it helps us avoid melee combat, which most mobs do best at. Now the nice thing about crossbows is that unlike the bow, you can actually store its charge. So if you want to charge it up, you can hold onto it to release quickly later. Now with all that being said, I personally find this to just be worse than the normal bow. While you can't store the charge there, it's a lot easier to fire out in multiple spurts, which I feel like it's how you'd want to use a bow. The enchantments for a crossbow are also a lot weaker, which is going to be an important consideration for the rest of this list. It can't use power, punch, flame, or infinity, making the arrows much weaker on a crossbow and more costly. It does get its own enchantments like piercing and multi-shot, but they're rarely going to be helpful in a combat setting. So while it is fun to shoot out fireworks at people, I definitely think the bow is a much better choice as an overall weapon. 6. The Mace. For our final weapon of A tier, we also have the newest entry at the time of this video. This is a really interesting one as it'll deal more damage the more a person falls before using it. That means it has the potential to do an insane amount of damage, far more than any other weapon is capable of. However, that also comes with one pretty significant downside. This is definitely one of the most difficult weapons to use since you're at risk of either dying from or just taking a lot of fall damage. Now keep in mind you don't always have to go super high up. Using wind charges in your offhand, you can give yourself a bit of a rocket jump and deal pretty solid damage that way. Of course, that then also means it costs a wind charge to use effectively. So even if this does deal a lot of damage sometimes, it's sort of hard to use in a common combat setting. With that being said, this is also stupid fun to use. I love the risk that comes with this, and it feels so satisfying to actually hit a mob on the way down. That's made even better with the wind burst enchantment, as each hit will send you shooting back up into the air, 21 blocks on level 3 to be exact. Now yeah, that does basically guarantee a lot of fall damage unless there's water nearby, but come on, you'd have to be absolutely miserable to not find this at least a little fun. So for that, I think the Mace definitely deserves to be at the top of A tier. But that leaves us with our top 5 in S tier, the weapons I believe to be the best of the best. These weapons also happen to be pretty straightforward for the most part, so I think they'll be pretty fast to explain. Starting up with 5, the Lava Bucket. This is pretty much just an improved flint and steel. Not only do you not have to worry about durability, but any mob that touches the lava will take far more damage than just touching the fire, and they'll stay on fire for longer. The damage buff is so significant that you can even just use the Lava Bucket by itself. The only real downside is that lava can burn the items a mob drops, but just pick up the lava before they fully die and you'll be fine. 4, the Axe. I know there are a lot of people out there who use this as their preferred weapon. While it does have a slower attack speed than a sword, it does more damage within a single hit. This is especially helpful in one-shotting things. I personally always use an axe on early game animals to avoid having to run around like an insane person. This one-shotting ability is also greatly helped by the fact that it can be enchanted with a few of the sword enchantments like Sharpness and Smite to boost its damage. Personally, what I like to do is have a Sharpness sword and a Smite axe, which can be helpful to take out any undead mob. The best part is that you're already going to have an axe in your inventory because of it being able to mine wood faster, so there's pretty much no downside in having this. 3, the Trident. I had a really difficult time placing this guy on the list, since I feel like I use it a lot more than the average player. This axe is both a decent melee weapon and a throwable weapon. Now as a melee weapon, it's undeniably worse than the sword since it's only really a good melee weapon for underwater mobs, but as a projectile, this isn't bad. Now you are basically required to have the loyalty enchantment, because if you don't, yeah, it's gone forever. Once you do have loyalty though, that turns this into a fantastic projectile, so you can basically use it without any worry of it running out. Sure, it does have durability, but with mending, that's not an issue at all. The Trident also gets the benefit of having the channeling enchantment, which makes anything that gets hit by it get struck by lightning. This is basically essential if you want to get mob heads, which require a charged creeper. Now all of that up until this point is great, but also this is agonizing to get. Now it has been made slightly easier with it being added to vaults and trial chambers, but the chances are still super low. Otherwise, you need to find a drown with a Trident, and then it only has an 11.5% chance to drop it if you're using looting 3, essentially meaning that only 1 in every 188 drowns will drop a trident. Yeah, that's absurd, so most people probably don't want to go through that effort. That's why I decided to place it below the bow, even if I do use the trident more. Speaking of, the bow. This is pretty simple. You can shoot out arrows and deal a lot of damage. You can also use tipped arrows for potion effects, but more often than not, just using normal arrows with a power enchantment is best. A power 5 bow will deal an insane 12.5 hearts on a full charge, which kills most things you could be shooting at. Bows are also pretty cheap and easy to get compared to the trident, costing only 3 string and 3 sticks. Now you do sadly need to get arrows, but with the infinity enchantment, that's basically a non-issue. So I think for a majority of players, the bow is easily the best projectile weapon. But for the best weapon overall, I mean, come on, it has to be the sword. Yeah, it's pretty basic, but that's why it's useful in so many situations. Any mob that gets up close to you, a sword is basically the best thing you can pull out. It's super easy to use, and when fully enchanted does quite a lot of damage. A sharpness 5 sword does 7.5 hearts, which is able to take out most mobs within 2 hits or so. Sure, not as much as a power 5 bow, but the sword is much faster and easier to use. That's also not considering one of the sword's best attributes, the looting enchantment. This is exclusive to the sword and will make anything you kill with it drop more loot and rare loot more often. Since I said this is a survival-centric video, that is extremely helpful to have to get more resources from the things you kill. You can also throw on fire aspect to not only deal more damage, but also cook some of those drops as well. So while it may have been a very predictable choice, I think the sword easily deserves the #1 spot as the best weapon in Minecraft. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you love suffocating people with gravel and hate me for not mentioning it? Let me know in the comments. I know the first half of this video is pretty wacky with all those niche cases, but I hope it made the video a bit more fun. I was genuinely not expecting this one to be as long as it was, so I gotta get back to editing the 200k Mario ranking. Dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.